Please welcome to the stage Goldman Sachs Head of AI Research, Bing Jiang, UBS's Head of Electronic Trading Quant's Center of Excellence, Giuseppe Nutti, Daisy AI's Deborah Yang, and our moderator, Evidence Editor Luke Gbedemah.
Thanks so much. Marco very helpfully there teed up the purpose, I think, of our conversation, which is, in a sense, to go back to the source and to think about the fact that the field that we've all gathered here today to talk about, AI in financial services, is like arguably more driven by research of different kinds, pure and academic, applied market and commercial research, than certainly any other that I can easily think of. So I hope this will be a useful conversation about what is driving the realization of end-use value, all of the subject matter that we've heard throughout the day, starting with research. So it's a pleasure to have these speakers joining. And I think we bring a diversity of perspectives, obviously being Giuseppe within banks yourselves and engaged in the applied research side of things. And Deborah, delighted to have you joining as well to talk more, I think, about the commercial market research that supplements the identification of value-adding uses of AI. So I hope it'll be a useful conversation in that sense. Bing, it would be terrific to start with you. Sure. You have a purview for the research that Goldman does, and it would be really helpful context, I think, for this conversation to just say, like, what are the imperatives that shape that research? What are the most important things that you have to think about day in, day out?
Sure. So I would say responsible AI, I would say is one of the most critical topic, especially for AI adoption in financial industry. So while sitting here and listening to the previous sessions, I noticed that almost every session more or less touched upon this responsible AI, even though they didn't say responsible. But actually, the trust, there's transparency that all related to responsible AI. So, by the way, I spent 20 years in tech industry, so I just joined Goldman last year. So I got to take a fresh look of the financial industry. So I think for financial industry, this topic is even more important. I just to elaborate a little more about the responsible AI, right? So the AI need to be secure, need to be transparent, need to be safe, need to be fair, right? So, and also last but not least, need to be accurate. So I will just mention two of them quickly here. So transparent AI, so also people call XAI, so explainable AI. There's a lot of research going on in the field. So start from making machine learning itself more interpretable, then deep learning become like a black box to many people. People complain about that. So nowadays, everyone is working on large language model. It's yet another black box to people. So there's not a lot of research put into that. So people heard about like chain of thought reasoning, step-by-step reasoning, and so on, right? So we are trying to open up the black box, make people understand how the model reach that conclusion and give them results, right? So, and then at research stage, we need to make sure when we design a model, we design algorithms, we keep in mind that we want to have this responsible AI as one of the designing principle. And the deployment stage, we need to make sure we have a well-established governance process in place. Something we call the guardrails for large language models, like to detect prompt injection, and jailbreaking, and so on. And also most importantly, like hallucination detection, right? So we want a large language model to be creative, but unfortunately, the side effect is that it hallucinates. So that's actually something come with the creativity. So we need to make sure that we want to detect those hallucinations.
Yeah. It'd be great just to dwell on that a tiny bit more. That was a conversation that we were having at the previous Evident AI Symposium in June in London, and the one before. If you could just say very briefly how you feel like research into that XAI approach has evolved in that time, really, just in the recent year.
Yeah, sure. So, in the old days when people work on interpretability for machine learning, right? Some example like called LIME, try to create a lot of like simpler kinds of words to mimic the more deep like a complex model. So that's LIME, and then people started working on make the deep learning neural networks more explainable, right? So something called like layer propagation, try to identify which layer, which weights contribute more to the final conclusion. And then the attention itself, I was fortunate to contribute to that self-attention when I was at IBM, and I also get excited by this famous transformer paper. So self-attention, so we can visualize the results, right? So it's a summarization of the documents. We can highlight the document, the phrase in the summary, and then point to people, this is the major information that come from the documents, right? So right now, like when we work on these large language models, most of you heard about this reference, right? So people see the results, they want to see the citation or reference, where you get this summary or these insights from, so they can easily click the link and see. I would put that under the explainability also.
Yeah. Terrific. It would be great, Deborah, before we move into the kind of the discussion on how research drives the practical applications, the use cases, just to get your response, your thoughts from a different perspective from Bing's. But do you see the same imperatives around the responsible, explainable side of things?
I think it's critical to the growth of the industry in the financial services area. We're one of the most regulated industries in the world, and your credibility can disappear on a very minor hallucination. And so we spend a huge amount of time working to, we understand that large language models, we work with multi-language models, and the research that we have to do on all of them, we determine and turn on and off depending on which ones have strengths and weaknesses. So we're much more on the application side of understanding the strengths and weaknesses. And of course, there's only so much training that can go into a large language model because it's relatively a dumb model. What it's missing is a layer of experience. We were talking about the importance of understanding the financial services industry's vernacular, the understanding of the firm's language, the type of individual that you want to speak to, the target audience, and be able to have the language model actually speak to the numbers that you present as opposed to loading all this confidential information. So it's really important to build something that is practical, and the way we understand is by 1,000 mistakes, 10,000 mistakes. Malcolm Gladwell talks about 10,000 hours.
Right.
It's 10,000 mistakes, and then it's 100,000 mistakes, and that is the evolution curve for experience to get to more responsible AI.
So those parameters complement the guardrails that you were mentioning, Bing. So with that as the context, I guess, for this conversation, it'd be great to turn to you, Giuseppe, to talk a bit about how research is flowing up into use cases. What are you most excited, involved with doing at the moment in terms of that translation, where you're seeing applied research becoming a capability, a technology, an application?
Sure, and thank you for having me here. We obviously got the white shirt memo. I guess there's obviously a huge amount of stuff going on. I mean, a testament to all these people here. I would say that we somewhat split what is Gen AI and LLMs versus I think what nowadays is called narrow AI. Obviously, Gen AI is the big excitement. We're awfully excited about it. We obviously care a huge amount about governance, especially when it comes to LLM and Gen AI, which is a very important and I would say somewhat new topic. In terms of the actual applications that we're interested in, from the Gen AI standpoint, what's really new is that we have algorithms that can read and write. That is, in essence, what's happening. And this obviously is very useful. maybe, and this is, what I am seeing is that most of the interesting applications when it comes to Gen AI are really centered around deploying tools that, firms, more commonly in the West Coast, that focus on just that are developing. There's a lot of interest in adjusting this stuff, but fundamentally the real successes are, hey, we have a coding copilot or, code generation, let's use that. And we're not really adding a huge amount, we're just mainly deploying. Some exception, I think, is centered around manipulating the vectors that come out of the sort of LLMs, sort of the embeddings. Those tend to be pretty powerful. So when you look at sort of the news or documents, whether they are for loans or what have you, those vectors can be very, very useful. So we have some interesting applications there that we're studying. I would say that beyond LLMs and Gen AI, the most interesting area for us, certainly for me, is centered around reinforcement learning. Not necessarily deep reinforcement learning, but if you think about it, most people in banking, what they do is they take actions under uncertain environment, hoping that and the reward will probably come in the future. That is basically what reinforcement learning is set out to do, and we find applications of this pretty much everywhere. Think of hey, we have algorithms that route our orders, whether to the New York Stock Exchange or to the NASDAQ. We have, algorithms that quote, prices of where our clients, can borrow stock. So many of these applications are about optimizing actions. And thus, we're finding more and more success in applying these techniques. And maybe here, I would say that the area which has, for us at least, contributed the most to successful application is the area that presents, I guess, that solves the exploration-exploitation conundrum. So much in finance is centered around, or traditionally has been centered around, looking back at our history, seeing whatever worked best, and copying that behavior. That's great under two fundamental assumptions, neither of which I think are correct. The first one, that the optimal behavior is somehow in our history. I mean, is it? And then the second is that the world is going to stay exactly as it was, for the last 2 years. These two things are generally not true in finance. And so we really focus on creating algorithms and applications that learn. And that learning fundamentally is centered around experimentation. And there's been so much advancement. Think of protein folding, AlphaGo. A lot of, there's a huge amount of innovation around it, but at least in my opinion, at the center of it has really been, balancing exploration and exploitation, using those learning tokens wisely. And that, I think, is a very exciting area.
It was so interesting, of course, to hear earlier today, David from Morgan Stanley and others talk about the incorporation of context into decision-making. On exactly that point, unless you're incorporating novel context, new data, you're essentially falling foul of the assumption that you've just described, assuming that the past will be like the present and indeed like the future. Maybe we turn that over to you, Bing, just to talk a bit about whether you see the same trends in the research flowing through to practical applications, and maybe then a bit on the kind of the broad buckets of actual use cases that Goldman are interested in and that you work on.
Sure. Yeah, I would just briefly add on to what Joseph just said. Yeah, we see three key pillars. So first one is increase the developer productivity, so including either software developer or quant developer or even data scientists, right? To use something like Copilot to help you to code generation, autocomplete, and so on. The second pillar, we call it knowledge worker operating efficiency. This includes analysts, people deal with document processing day by day. I try to extract information from the document. In the old days, people use customized model, BERT model, and now people rely on more and more on large language model or fine-tuned model. Third pillar, it's more about increase the business growth and enhance the client experience. So as you see, from first one to third one, we're moving from the impact of the bottom line to the top line, right? So one of the speakers mentioned this morning, it's more and more challenging if you want to impact the revenue. So I think that's the ultimate goal for all of us. So last one, the client experience. So I want just give a quick example. Right? So imagine for your portfolio manager, before they go to meet with their client, what if they can just use AI to quickly pull up some insights, customized, personalized, and then generate slides for you before you go to present it to them, all within a few minutes, rather than wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right? So that's an example, and I think it's not a dream. I think safely there's a practical use case there. I would say just this strip pillar, and then of course everything has large language model as a backbone, right? All the research goes into that over years. I think those all contribute to make these things more practical.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should double click on that third category with you, Deborah, because that's very much in the remit, what Daisy does. Can talk about, how in practical terms you're doing some work that's enhancing that customer experience side, because I think be a broad consensus in the room that's top 5, potentially top 3 most value-adding, most important priority for a lot of the organizations here.
Yes.
How do you see it?
I'm very glad that Goldman and Daisy are doing things that are quite similar framework, which is there's must-do activities and then activities that move the needle, right? And many of us love to innovate and spend the time to amplify the human innovation. That doesn't happen in the past. You need humans for that. So you want to clear up the workload that can be replicated over and over and over again from compliance reporting and other things that you have a mountain of things to do. The part that we spend a lot of time is getting that feedback loop from our third-party users, from commercial banks, asset managers, even working with some stock exchanges to work with us to get that feedback loop. Which then continues to, once you make that mistake, the 10,000 mistakes, you're not going to make that mistake again. And that kind of institutionalized learning can help you start moving from must-do activities more and more to the value add, help you raise AUM, help you increase marketing effectiveness, help you with sales enablement tools.
Yeah, that's what I was certainly struck by in thinking through this conversation, was the kind of layering of different types of research on top of one another to build towards a particular enterprise goal. There was also something I suppose we could get into. We've gathered here, obviously, by Evident in the context of the Evident Index, and it'd be remiss not just to make the point that some of the banks and organizations that are being ranked have applied research divisions. Some have very large ones, some have smaller ones, some don't have any at all. I wonder if I could get your thoughts, Giuseppe, on the value of research divisions. How do they serve as a differentiator, as a competitive advantage? And it would be interesting to turn the same question over to you, Bing.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to say there's a lot of value, since that's my job. For the avoidance of that. No, I suppose it's a super exciting time to be researching this area. And, I do think that I have probably one of the most exciting jobs in banking in general. Now, there is a catch, though, which is like at the end of the year, you've got to have something to show for, at least, and I think this shapes very much the research agenda. I think when we look at what topics do we research, how quickly can we deploy it, how much is it going to move the needle, and how measurable that movement is going to be. Like, those are things that sort of shape, hey, we might have one or two more speculative research ideas, and they may run for a few more years, but you can't just have those, because you're going to have a down year, and that's not going to be a good look. I think you want to have also things that you are more certain, maybe they're a little bit less exciting, but you are more certain, and having the right book of work, I think, is quite important. Not only that, I would say what is quite important is to match the right people to the right, kind of book of work. Generally speaking, researching the moonshot may be exciting, but not that many people have the whereabouts to, do something for numerous years without any real results. Right. It takes a certain type of personality. whilst, maybe, sort of that personality might feel pretty bored if they are doing, stuff that churns more quickly. So all of that really features into what I would say is the, finance and banking research, management.
Yeah, and obviously we heard earlier today on that conversation about experimentation for experimentation's sake is not going to last very long. There has to be a view to value creation and to the, I suppose, at least the provable learning that you're describing, Deborah. So let's talk about what's most exciting now, because I think what we've teed up for the rest of the day is a conversation about the big topic that feels like it's coming down the road. Obviously, there are some practical and in deployment examples, but the language around it isn't really settled, which is the agentic systems side. But what else is there? Maybe we stick with you just for now, Giuseppe, to give us a sense of the kind of the big building blocks of that other agenda for research and the most exciting part of what's coming down the line.
Sure. I mean, there is so much, really. This would be a couple of hours, at least for me. But we've
got like 5 minutes.
5 minutes, great. 1 minute for me. Look, the agentic stuff has been talked about, and I think there's better people in this room and certainly on this stage that are equipped to talk about it. But it's certainly very, very exciting. Maybe the part that is most exciting to me from an academic standpoint, for sure, is what I often termed sort of conditionally activated neural networks, but more broadly, I guess, is the idea that the standard operation of neural networks, which is the building block of all the exciting stuff that we're up here talking about, is that the entire thing has to be computed, or at least a constant portion of it, regardless of the task. This, if you think of our brain, would be, ridiculous. Whether I lift a glass or I try and explain the theory of relativity, which I don't understand, there is a clear proportionality. This is a topic that's been researched certainly for many years, but hasn't been cracked. There's early exit, networks. There's a variety of solutions. Nowadays the ubiquitous mixture of experts is a way to conditionally activate a neural network. But that proportionality with the difficulty of the task is really, I don't think we're quite there yet. But the power of that, since we've had numerous panels before here talking about like energy consumption, time, what hardware do you use, NVIDIA stock prices is, through the roof. All of those are fundamentally, the funnel that is stopping the real leap forward. And I think researching that area is probably one of the most exciting things out there.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to turn the question to you, Bing, and maybe just to sprinkle something else in there. I'm sure most of the people in the room will have seen reporting and research around a potential plateau in the performance delivered by scaling LLMs in the way that we've seen in this kind of current era of development. Perhaps you could kind of answer the same question as Giuseppe. What are you most excited about in the context of that potential realization and the turn to other techniques, other approaches for delivering performance?
Sure. Yeah, so suddenly the agentic somehow become the most popular word these days. So I saw many companies now try to collect their product with... It's
too late to change the slide later.
Put a label there, our product is agentics, but it itself is not new, right? So as Luca just said, there's so many building blocks under it, years and years of research going into it. So it's not like overnight somehow suddenly there's AI agents. So in terms of research or direction, one of my most favorite topics has always been reasoning. So in my view, reasoning probably is one of the most important topics between going from AI to AGI. Right? So most of you probably saw those like jokes online or some silly example people share, like AI is like giving very silly answers. So that's one of the examples of common sense reasoning, which I think Giuseppe mentioned a little bit there, right? Common sense, so even for something like maybe 5-year-old or 3-year-old knows, but the AI sometimes makes those silly mistakes. Then a few other examples in terms of reasoning, because this is not an academic conference, I will not just pick a paper, I just stay a little bit higher level, right? So reasoning itself is not just one area, it's a large scope there, so itself. Let me give you a few examples. I mentioned earlier, explainable AI, the language itself can rely on reasoning a lot, right? To show people how the model going step by step, and then you eventually reach the final decision. And then for finance, a few important examples like temporal reasoning, for example, right? So there's like all the different events happening in the world for finance, or let's see if there's the weather, there's a thunderstorm somewhere, then there's a affected shipment, right? For people work on commodity, so you may know that's important. But then can AI figure out the sequence of all the information, events, and the relation of that? And then another example for finance is causality, or people call causal inference. So I know some firms have been interested in that. Like, let's see, they want to figure out which factor in the macroeconomy changes contribute to today's market move, right? So there are so many things happening, everyday wars and inflation and so on. So causality that's also part of the reasoning. So try to figure out what caused that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's lots of interesting, exciting research going on in this
Undoubtedly.
space. Yeah.
Deborah, we'll give you the last word. What most excites you, emerging from the research your company's doing, or the academic and peer research that you see elsewhere?
Well, I'm most excited about the promise of mass personalization. So this is something that humans are not able to do. You target market, you speak to one audience, and you can only have maybe 5, and your financial services only really resonates to a certain groups. My daughter is a next generation investor. She finds all the finance jargon terribly uninteresting. But if you mention that she likes musical theater and you put it in the context of something that she understands, and the story of investing resonates, then you can break down investing gaps among different groups of people, the female investment gap, and lots of really interesting things by breaking down language. And the machines are very capable of doing that at scale, right? So this is one of the things I'm most excited by.
Causation, sequencing, hyper-personalization, a revolution in the architecture. That's exciting enough. We'll close it there. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.